Can everybody here are right above the hum? What I'd like to do very quickly is sort of have a go around the room and tell us who we are and what grade we work in, what students we work with, and that type of thing. And then what do you hope to accomplish during our time together so we can make front with expectations and meet everybody's needs. Start with you, man.
I'm Lucy Hayden, and I work with high school students
All right,
and teachers in North Carolina, China, and South Africa.
Wow.
And I am interested in learning about how high school students in South Africa and China can do some survey data about and learning among their peers using mobile devices.
Very cool.
Good morning. My name is Rashawn Viscusi, and I'm in Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools. I'm an ESL technology resource teacher, and we just rolled out 30 iPad trays to our ESL teacher classroom. So we're looking for a way to help them understand how to get data and, create student projects and share them with other teachers in the school to show language proficiencies of their students.
I'm Annie Moses. I teach algebra, and one of the biggest things is what can we do with technology for them to be able to manipulate and assess their own data and it's just stuff we get them.
Good morning, Freddie Larkin, principal of the Middle School for Beach, and right now our division is currently implementing a new strategic plan, and one of the big components is RTI, so we should see how we're using this as part of that.
I'm Jasmine Sophia. I'm from River College. I'm the Blended Learning Research Assistant there, so I'm here in the school movement.
Good morning, I'm Chris Well. I'm from New York State. I work at SUNY Cortland. We are the 10th largest teacher education program in the United States of America. And I prepare the elementary teachers to use technology for the future.
My name is Ty Williams, and I'm from Montgomery, Alabama. I'm a math teacher for 7th grade. I'm also the tech coordinator for my school. We just implemented iPads for all of our teachers. And we are a failing school as an entire district. So what we're trying to do is using RTI and getting the data, how do we pull the data when they've changed our state testing 3 times in the past 3 years, and how do we collect the data and then turn it into the classroom.
Jason Paddock from Spartanburg 2, I'm in instructional technology, I'm here to learn whatever.
Okay. We got a lot of whatever today.
I'm Lindsay Monahan. I teach 4th grade math at North Raleigh Christian Academy. And this is the first year that we've had every student has their own iPad, so just how they can use it to create projects and how I can use that to also accomplish goals in class.
Kevin Oliver with NC State College of Education. We train future tech coordinators, so I'm interested in strategies to share with them, teaching and assessment.
My name is Lynn Godkin, and I'm from Canada. I teach in the Alameda District School Board. We have recently started a one-to-one program with our grade 7s and 8s, and they have now moved into grade 9. I teach in the secondary panel. So I teach in the social science area, and I'm also one of the iPad coaches in our school. So I am here looking for information and tips and tricks to take back to teachers because it's so very new to us.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Mark Riley from Ohio University. I'm the technology coordinator for the College of Health Sciences and Professions. Our college, along with our field, healthcare, has moved more towards mobile devices. If you've gone to the doctor recently, you've seen the nurse has a device. So we're moving to that. Our nurses are being trained now with iPads in their hand. Our physical therapists are now being trained with it. We've got a lot of grad students now that are coming to me. They're doing a lot of research on their iPads. So I'm going to see what's happening. Excellent.
I'm Amanda Malatlian. I'm from Salem Academy in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I teach math at a private all-girls high school. And my colleague and I, we teach math with a cart of iPads. I'm Caroline. I also teach at Salem Academy.
Robert Burdick. I'm from Exelon Nuclear. We're looking for new ways to present to our students that we have now. That's what we're here to get when we come out of this.
Walter Short's also with Exelon Nuclear. we implemented iPads instead of textbooks this year, and looking for more ways of using the iPads.
I'm Linda, drove down from Lake Erie in Ohio. And
This is warm.
this is warm. I'm at a college and I'm very interested in gathering research for both ways to analyze research for our undergrad and grads.
I'm Jill Stewart. I'm from Annapolis, Maryland. I teach special ed anywhere throughout pre-K to 5th grade, depends on the year. And we just kind of inundated our school with iPads. And I'm looking actually to make my job and the classroom job as teacher easier by gathering data. A lot of times as special educators with requisite learning, we hand off, here's what you should be doing for your students, and let me know how it's going and gather data, and it's overwhelming for them. But if we can hand them an iPad and say, hey, all you gotta do is click, 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 and then forward me that information, it's gonna make our job so much easier, and they'll welcome special ed students and educators in the classroom without apprehension.
That's great, make the job easier.
Yeah, for everybody.
Yes.
I'm Jill Cohen from Perkins County in North Carolina. Predominantly at the secondary level, but we implemented iPads last week, 3rd through 12th, in my model district team. So we're in the middle of getting them to students' hands with 6th grade.
Good.
So waiting for best practices, continue to bring back to the group.
Perfect. Yes, sir.
I'm Derek Martin, from Canada as well. I'm a resource teacher, and I'm kind of looking to see in this particular session anyways, how I can use the iPad to collect data from the entire school, and sort of and identify trends and identify needs and things like that. Perfect.
I'm Abby Morning. I'm an instructional coach at Ocean Bay Middle School near Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It's our 2nd year of having one-on-one devices for all of our students, and I'm just here for more ways to collect some data.
Good.
I'm Stephanie Clement with Abby, Ocean Bay Middle, I live at Ocean Beach, and I'm a Salem College graduate. So just looking at ways to use it in the classroom.
And I'm Dan Kelly. I am a 6 to 8 technology teacher at Franklin Academy Middle School, and I'm also a grad student at NC State studying for classroom instruction.
Very good. Well, again, thank you to all of you. My name is John Zinn. I'm Director of Enrollment Management and Student Services at the School of Professional and Continuing Studies at the University of Richmond. Long title there, but I'm also part of our adjunct faculty. I'm an associate professor and I teach economics and knowledge management, which I'll talk about a little bit more. Taught high school for 12 years, so I'm very familiar with that type of environment, and I spent a lot of time engaged with junior achievement. So I've been in classrooms from kindergarten all the way up to teaching graduate students. So I have a little bit of perspective for everything and a lot of perspective for the high school and college classroom. The big question is why mobile devices? And if you recognize this beast, this is what I took to college back in the dark ages, 26 pounds of K-Pro. Really one of the first mobile computing devices. And since I teach econ, I've really got to point out the adjusted for inflation price today would be about $3,500. So it makes that iPad look relatively cheap, doesn't it? Tell you just a little bit about our population. We're one of 5 schools at the University of Richmond, and we're the evening school. We teach non-traditional students, undergraduate and graduate programs. We handle our teacher education programs at the University of Richmond. And we say that we're non-traditional, and it basically means anybody who's not residential. Used to be, we would say non-traditional look like us, and that typically is the case. But we have a lot of young folks in our program these days. The average age is 36, and it's declining. So as you can imagine, when I throw these iPads in the classroom, I'm not necessarily working with digital natives. Right? There's some apprehension when they get the technology. We really hang our hat on intergenerational learning. 2 years ago, we graduated the youngest student at the university, Jimmy was 20, and our oldest student, 74, in the Master's of Liberal Arts program. So again, I just wanted to share that so you can see that we work with a very diverse student population. So our first quiz for the day, true or false? iPads are limited to consumption activities. True or false? It's a few head shake. False, right? When iPads first came out, a lot of my colleagues were saying, oh, play games, listen to music. There wasn't a whole lot of value. And I really wanted to get involved in producing with the iPad. And our presentation this morning, our keynote address really illustrated how we can use the iPad to produce a lot of great things. If you're like me, you probably still have some colleagues that believe they're just designed for consumption activities. I'm really amazed that our university when I teach in the business school occasionally, a lot of my colleagues over there still don't like technology in the classroom. As a matter of fact, the students will walk in with their iPads and their laptops. Please, sir, may we use this, right? And that's a little scary to me, but I understand it because it's another layer of management in the classroom. And my colleagues say, well, I'm worried they're going to be on Facebook, or they're going to be on Twitter, or they're going to be doing all kinds of crazy things, inappropriate stuff. So the idea is we just have to change the way we teach. And coming from the high school environment, I'm used to moving around and tapping people on the shoulder or the back of the head and being engaged. So when we add technology to the classroom, it just adds that extra layer of stuff to do. But it's good stuff. We all know that this technology has allowed us to put the tools of the classroom in our pockets, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's what my students are loving. They're really hesitant to have iPads in the beginning, but they love the fact that they can get most of their books on the tablet. They can carry their class with them. We use Blackboard, and I use iTunes U for some of my classroom management. And they get spoiled by the end of the semester because they're carrying around something that's less than a pound rather than having a heavy backpack, which I know is an issue in the high school environment. So people ask, where did I get this idea for collecting surveys? Well, it was at the happiest place on earth back a couple years ago. My family and I were in Orlando visiting Disney, and when we would come off of rides or come out of certain venues, there were these cast members, as they called them down in Disneyland, Disney World, holding iPads, and they were just asking 5 or 6 questions. How was the experience? What could we improve? Blah, blah, blah. There's too much trash laying in the corner. And I knew that information was being beamed underground somewhere, and they were taking care of it very quickly using real-time information. So the idea literally came from Disney for this project. Our university has a Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology, and they started out by buying a set of 50 iPads, and faculty had to apply, and we still do. We applied to use the iPads for a semester. The technology folks come in, demonstrate the iPads to the students. When we do the application, we have to demonstrate the purpose. We have to fill out lots of forms, talk about what types of apps we're going to use, what the outcomes are going to be, and we have to promise to share the information after we had the iPads in class for the semester. When I first started this a couple years ago, it was relatively new for the students, and not many folks had iPads. I'm finding more and more of our students are coming to the classroom with their own iPads, which is really a great thing. As we go along, if you have questions, comments, if I'm moving too fast or too slowly, if I'm being confusing, please let me know. I want to catch up a little bit of time that we lost just a few minutes ago. I've been very spoiled. 4 of my classes have participated in the iPad initiative so far, wrapping up this semester we're currently in. And that's a wonderful thing, but I think it also tells a story on the other side, because the university has 250 iPads to use each semester. What do you think it's saying, the fact that I've been able to use classroom sets of iPads 4 times?
They're not being utilized enough.
They're not being utilized enough. There aren't enough of us out there willing to be guinea pigs or pioneers and take advantage of this. So I think it's a great thing, but it's unfortunate because we have so many classrooms on campus that aren't participating in this initiative. So I've had a basic introductory to econ class, a topical class, economic issues in the presidential election 2 years ago, another topical class, LGBTQ consumer, and this fall, economic issues in the midterm elections. So largely political science courses, largely economics courses, largely current event types courses. But we'll talk about how we can integrate surveys into a lot of different classes. The app that I've been using is iSurvey. It's been around for a while, and it was one of the very few out there when I started doing this 2.5 years ago. There are gobs of survey apps out there now. I shouldn't say gobs, there are a good handful for you to choose from, and I've listed links to those on Emoto for us. So if you want to go there after our time together, yes?
Does that require constant internet access?
Great question. It does not require constant internet access. Once the survey is downloaded onto the iPad, students can be anywhere, and once they get back into their work offline. As soon as the iPad goes back to the recognized network, the data is uploaded to a simple website. Great question. iSurvey costs a little bit of money. I think it's right now about $80 or $85 for a month worth of surveys. The good news is if you tell these chaps in New Zealand that you're a teacher, you get an education discount, and I just paid $60. There are apps out there that don't cost as much money, or they can be found that are free. As you can imagine, the lower cost apps have a little bit less functionality.
Yeah, I just wondered if you had also
also looked at Google Forms?
We have. We played with those a little bit. I stayed away from that because I wanted something that was a little more cash and carry. With iSurvey, it does a great job of summarizing the data and beautiful graphs and things like that in real time. So it was helpful for me. But absolutely, create a Google form that you could use on that would be phenomenal.
Especially if you're in a situation where you already provided that, you know, if you give us a Google school account or something like that.
That would be perfect. Absolutely. Do you have questions? So take a look at the other apps that are out there. A lot of them are very, very good. There's some quirky things with iSurvey, but it's also nice because it can branch out depending on how people answer a question. You can send them down one rabbit hole or another, and you can customize the questions that they receive. Survey design, when you're thinking about your survey, you got to put a lot of effort into it, I found. The questions, the type of questions you want to ask, how they're asked, the sequence, because we know how we ask a question can influence responses, and the sequence in which we ask questions can also influence responses. You want to think about length, because I've made the mistake of letting my students throw in everything but the kitchen sink, right? And that can be a challenge. You can collect a lot of great data, but you also get survey fatigue when people are taking the survey and it's 100 questions. So you also want to take the time to test the survey before you publish it. Have some people go through it to look for typos, to make sure there aren't any continuity errors and things of that nature. And this is a really good practice to go along with your students because it teaches them how to create these surveys. A wealth of information out there on the web to learn how to create surveys, how to ask the questions properly, how to make sure you're not leading people's responses, even though sometimes you may wish to lead their responses just a little bit. So this is a great thing. I usually take 2 or 3 classes with my students just to design the survey. And since we teach at night, that's 2.5 hours each night. So we're talking 8, 9, 10 hours just to create the survey before they actually go out and deploy it. Right? Using human subjects. Depending on where you are, this may or may not be regulated. At the university level, we have something called the IRB as a review board, and anytime we're playing with human beings, we have to make sure we're doing something that's not going to be harmful, or that the harm is limited based on the outcomes. So anytime we do a survey, we have to go through this process and have it approved. And most of the time, because we're dealing with relatively innocuous topics, even the politics sometimes can get contentious, or contentious, they'll look at the questions to make sure they're not offensive. And when my students were doing the LGBTQ survey, we actually had some questions pulled out because they were deemed potentially harmful. And one of the questions was asking people to self-identify their orientation. And in Virginia, that's not a protected class in terms of employment. And there was a concern that even though we have a lot of protections in the survey process, if somebody could be identified, could it be possible they would lose their job because of that? So the IRB panel said, no, the question has to come out of there. Depending on your school, it may just be your department head, it may be your principal, it may be your central office. But be sure you're checking the right boxes when you create your survey and go through some training with the students. Because we're a university, we have this online training system that my students go through. It takes about 25 minutes. They answer these questions, about confidentiality, about not sharing information, about not looking at people's responses as they're typing them into the iPad and that type of thing. So you want to make sure you're doing the right thing as far as your district is concerned. Any questions about that? Because it can be sticky sometimes. Good. All right. Survey topics. You can survey just about anything. I'm glad we had somebody in here in the elementary category because I was talking with some of my colleagues and they were saying, well, John, how could you possibly put an iPad in the hands of a 3rd, 4th, 5th grader and let them conduct a survey? And I actually had some trouble finding some lesson plans for this, but I finally did. Because I was thinking, 2nd, 3rd, 4th graders, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite food? What's your favorite activity? What do you like to do for vacation? And those types of things. All can be parts of a questionnaire. When the students get a little bit older, you can have surveys asking them what their favorite soft drinks are, how much time do they spend studying each night, how much time do they play video games, how much time do they sleep, and those types of things. And that's all really powerful. And the thing is, it can be across the disciplines. We'll talk about that in just a second. But can you think of some ideas for survey topics that you would be interested in using with your students? Obviously, when we get into government classes, the elections and political opinion polls are clear to us. But can you think of other things? Yes?
I'm
doing a presentation on if girls design mobile learning, what would that look like? So I'm interested in what kinds of questions people think I should ask of high school
Absolutely.
girls.
Yeah, it's a great topic. What else? Yes, ma'am.
Well, since we're in middle school, we had the team concept, and so we were talking about how that in social studies, if they were to do a survey, and we would do the analysis in math, that we
Yes.
would do in math basically, we're talking about that, using that crossover too, that the assessment on both subjects, so.
Absolutely. Teamwork. Yes.
We just had an interesting, it was actually a class for, we're in a class for the school, so, including the socks, there's a sock fad apparently going on.
Absolutely.
And I don't get it, but the students actually put together the survey of what rules do you like, which would you like us to change?
Perfect.
And that actually led to a change in our dress code policy with respect to socks.
Sure. Student governance, that's powerful if you're part of the SGA or anything like that for the students, in terms of what things they might like to do for a pep rally, what types of dances they might like to have, other special events. Absolutely. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
We use them in first grade, but we use SurveyMonkey because it's simple and you can
Yes.
work with. But before we create our rotations for math, our centers, we let them take a vote on what are they interested in, and then we take the top 3, and that's how we kind of generate it through language arts and so they feel empowered. It's simple, quick, but they use iPads, I think they're doing something great.
Yeah.
Because they are.
Exactly. If you're involved in administration and you're looking to schedule classes and you're wanting to see what types of elective students might be interested in taking, this would be a way to do that. So the options, I think, are endless. Some of my colleagues are saying, well, you're just a geek and you can do it with your econ, but how can this really be used elsewhere? So clearly there are lots of opportunities. And then the collaboration you were just talking about, you know, teams and halls. I know a lot of middle schools in particular in Virginia, they're organized in pods and wings and things like that. So, you know, the math teacher and the social studies teacher can be involved, perhaps the science teacher. And my cousin just did a survey. She teaches high school in West Virginia, and she used SurveyMonkey, but she shared the link with her social studies colleagues in other schools. And then they were comparing opinions, you know, based on the school that the students are actually enrolled in. So there are lots of opportunities. And when you were talking about students in South Africa or in Africa and other places, you know, if you have sister schools across the state or across the country, it would be really interesting to compare the results from area to area. So challenges, absolutely there are challenges. We lived through about 10 minutes of challenges this morning trying to get the PowerPoint set up and the projector working. There are some challenges. Sometimes the students get a little confused when they're out there trying to collect the surveys and it's not uploading right away. Or when they get back into a Wi-Fi network, it has to upload. This last survey that we've gone through, we had some trouble with my survey. They were great and fixed it very quickly, but the branching wasn't working quite right. And what was happening in the survey, the participant had to select which congressional district they resided in. And depending on their response, that sent them to the particular ballot, if you will. And somehow in the background with iSurvey, it got a little scrambled and it was sending people to iQuestions. And we went through about 36 hours of nail biting. Unfortunately, it didn't impact many responses, but there can be challenges with using the technology. And you just roll with it. It's part of life, as we saw this morning. Well, just a few minutes about surveys by course. Check the time to make sure we're in good shape. Take a look at some of the surveys by course and results, and then I want to open the floor to any questions you guys have. In the first course, in the spring of 2012, it was a basic introduction to economics, supply and demand, aggregate supply and demand, international trade, and things like that. And the hook, we talked about hooks this morning, the hook for my class, particularly with dealing with adult students, is economic literacy. Because most people, when they come into an econ class, what happens? They either love it or they hate it. And most adults, for some reason, they hate it. They probably had a bad experience 20 years ago in class, and they just think they're going to be absolutely miserable. So I really like to take the approach of the hook being economic literacy, and the idea that we're voters, that we're involved in the community, and that we need to understand some basics. We use the test of economic literacy as the primary meat and potatoes for our survey. The test of economic literacy has been around since the mid-1980s, and it is an instrument that's used to figure out what high school students should know by the time they graduate. So it's really powerful for my students to go out and take a look at what was happening in the community, finding out that a lot of folks out there voting and making decisions either at the poll or with their wallets in their pocketbook know a whole lot about economics. So then we added a few questions for our own, some demographics and things of that nature. And for the very first application, I actually had to map out what we were going to do in the course. And all of that up there says a lot, but basically what it says is that we have fundamental economic concepts, micro, macro, and international. And we're going to use the survey to figure out what the general public knows and tie that back into some research in the class and encourage lifelong learning, collaborative research, and transferable technology skills. So here are the results. The first time out, we had 189 survey responses. Not a lot. The margin of error was just about 7% for this. And what we learned was pretty interesting. First off, males score better than female. That's typically what happens with the test of economic literacy. Not that econ is a guy subject, but it's kind of that math brain type of thing. And I don't think we encourage the young ladies quite like we should to understand economics. So that wasn't surprising. Then we drove down and found some really interesting things. The majority of the folks between 18 and 45 identified the economy as being in a recovery. But older folks, 45 to 75, felt like the economy was in a recession. Now remember, this is 2012. Why do you think that might have happened? Why would older folks be a little less optimistic about the economy than the younger folks? Any ideas? If you're like me, I took a big hit on my retirement account, right? So what we hypothesized was that older folks were a little less optimistic because we were hurt a little bit more, impacted a little bit more. We were a little less optimistic about economic activity. And then when we broke it down by Democrats and Republicans, it was really interesting that Democrats, 59% identified the economy as being in recovery, while 71% of those who identified as Republican said the economy was in recession. Fascinating stuff. And that begs us to ask the question, in what stage of the business cycle were we then and are we now? You guys ready to cringe with 10 seconds of econ? This is the business cycle as measured by real GDP, real meaning adjusted for inflation, time on the x-axis. Economic activity peaks, it declines a little bit, we have contraction, reaches a bottom point, a trough, we have a recovery, and then an expansion goes beyond the previous peak. So economic activity tops out at $10, drops to $7, and then starts to increase again from 7 to 10, that's the recovery. And then anything above $10, that is an economic expansion. Now keep in mind here, 59% of Democrats said it was a recovery, 71% of Republicans said a recession. If we take a look at the actual data, in 2011 the economy left the recovery and entered an expansion. But yet the majority of folks couldn't identify the economy as being in an expansion. And most politicians don't talk about that, and certainly the media doesn't talk about that either. Right? This just gives you an idea of the historic trend for GDP from 1980 to the present, and that's the most recent economic downturn. That's the George W. Bush recession, H.W. Bush recession, and the Trump recessions of the Reagan years. We have a fantastic term for this downturn. We call it a humdinger. The recession we went through was very, very pronounced and powerful, and my guess is history is going to judge it to be a depression. As a matter of fact, we're starting to hear people call it a managed depression at this point, so it'll be interesting in another 10 to 15 years what people have to say about it. Next, of course, economic issues in the presidential election. We talked about economics. It was a current events-based course offered through liberal arts, and we had 423 responses, about 5% margin of error for this one. For those approving the president's performance, this was the summer before the election. 77% had a negative opinion of Romney, 20% was more neutral. We get down here, those approving the president's performance, 81% felt the economy was in a recovery. Remember, we were in an expansion, but at least these folks were optimistic. 70% believed the economy would improve in the next 6 months. For those disapproving of the president's performance, 36% had a positive opinion of Romney, 24% had a negative opinion, and 40% had a neutral opinion. So 3 or 4 months before the election, our survey was indicating that Romney might have a little bit of trouble here. At least in that point, he wasn't really convincing folks that he was the person for the job, even though these people were disapproving of the president's performance. We get down to the bottom, 84% believe the economy was in a recession. 43% believe the economy would remain the same. and 34% believe the economy will worsen. So this is really interesting information. The students are crunching the numbers, and they're taking a look at what these survey responses are indicating, and then they're trying to compare it to what the literature has to say. And what they found was the reason people who approved of the president, why they were so optimistic, folks of the party of the sitting president tend to be more optimistic than the opposition, and that really is a no-brainer. But there's a lot of literature out there that supports that through research. So then we move into the summer course, the LGBTQ consumer, and this basically was an economics course looking at buying power and why we're seeing this social revolution, and could some of that be the result of economic power. And 375 responses, and we got a lot of data out of this that I'm going to share a few of the tidbits with you. Should same-sex marriages be legally recognized? And it's broken down by demographic, and it's pretty powerful. Pretty powerful, going from almost 67% to 32%. And these slides will be up on Edmodo if you want to go back and reference them after our time together. Should an openly gay or lesbian individual be allowed to teach? Fairly strong support. We were surprised to see this support in the responses in our survey, but it gets fascinating from here. The next question, how important is it to have stories, history, and role models in the schools? Not so sure about that, our respondents said. Not so sure about that. That was powerful. And then something that continues today in discussions, do you believe a business owner, such as a baker or bed and breakfast, has the right to discriminate and refuse service based on orientation? Kind of powerful there in what people had to say. We'll revisit that in just a minute. Finally, the most recent course, the midterm elections. What was powerful about this, our survey indicated Warner and Gillespie, they were our two senatorial candidates. And it showed that it was going to be a close race. The pundits out there at the time, the media, felt that Warner had a substantial lead. And the results came in, and he really did. In fact, it was contested for about 36 hours before Gillespie conceded. So that was pretty impressive. My students were pleased to see that their poll did a little bit better than some of the larger media polls. We asked the same question about same-sex marriage. And what's interesting, in the 13 or 14 months between the surveys, we can see a general improvement in opinions. And that's something powerful. If you choose to do surveys in your classes over and over, then you can track trends with your students and help them identify what some of the trends might be, and then dive a little bit deeper to figure out why those trends might be occurring. The business owner and the baker, this is really interesting because we had enough respondents with the Tea Party to actually count their input this time, and they were pretty strong in their opinion that yes, we should be able to discriminate. For some reason, libertarian almost doubled, and that could be because of our sample size. But for all the other categories, the opinion.
Let me talk about digging a little bit deeper. Are there tools to go beyond the survey for sort of data-related storytelling, or your focus group kind of things?
Sure. One of the things that I really encourage my students to take a look at is the Pew Institute, the research that they do, because it's CNN, Wall Street Journal, Fox, MSNBC, they all do their own polling. I like the Pew because it feels like the NPR surveys. You know what I mean? So what I do is I ask them to go out and try to find information about other surveys and compare it to what we've done. And quite often, particularly with Pew, there'll be these narratives that they pull together this data. And
what I'm wondering is, are there tools for the creation of their own narrative? Say you want them to do a little bit of a case study or profile.
For a multimedia tool?
Yeah.
Sure. I've had students, it was fascinating with digital storytelling. Our students have been doing that for some time. I've had students put together things with iMovie, they've done things with Prezi, they've done things, of course, with PowerPoint. There is something called VoiceThread, which is, if you haven't heard of that, is relatively elementary. But you take a PowerPoint presentation, upload it to VoiceThread, and then you can voice over it, or you can use video, and you can type text in, and it has a resource so people can add to the conversation. I might have something to say about this slide, and then you can add your comments, and you can add yours. So it becomes a discussion virtually out there. So there are some really neat things that can be done that way. Remember the phases of our business cycle, and the key is that we've been in expansion since the first and second quarter of 2011. When we took the results of this survey, which demographics felt we were in a contraction, recovery, and expansion. It's really fascinating here that almost 70% of the Tea Party and almost 50% of the Republicans still believe the economy is in a recession. And my students spend a lot of time talking about that and the role that the media plays in this type of thing, and the type of media that the individual demographics are looking at. Because that was one of the questions: where do you get your news content? And we go down to the internet, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and others. So it's really interesting to take a look at that as well. And then, what do you think is going to happen with the economy in the near term? Fairly optimistic folks to fairly pessimistic folks. This is really eye-opening, particularly in a political science course, giving the students a chance to discuss these things. Heading towards the end, the comments are generally positive from the students. This is just a tiny handful. They love having the iPad. They really find that having the iPad to collect the data is very convenient, rather than giving somebody a sheet of paper or telling them to go to this web link to offer their opinion and that type of thing. They found that after the survey was completed, it encouraged a lot of discussion. Some of those discussions were very positive. Some of those got a little bit uncomfortable because people were saying, well, heck yeah, I answered this, but of course the economy is a wreck, and it's because of X, Y, and Z and that type of thing. But it allowed for dialogue, and the students generally thought that that was a really good thing. There were a tremendous amount of comments about our university using the technology that the folks taking the survey thought was really pretty cool. These are surveys of convenience, right? So they're not randomized, they're not going out and randomly selecting people. They're surveying friends, family members, work colleagues, classmates. Some of the students, I encourage them to go in pairs out into the community to get permission and collect data at different venues. Some of them went to Walmart and Target. A couple of them, believe it or not, went to bars and collected data. And once they got out there, they felt pretty comfortable for the most part doing it. So really interesting stuff. What questions do you have? That's a lot of information going at us pretty quickly, and we still have about 11 minutes together.
These are undergraduate students?
These are undergraduate, yes.
Do they have any statistics background or coursework, or is it just you have to kind of go through?
That's a great question. What type of statistics or math background might these students have? Very limited. Very limited. These, again, are non-traditional students. Many of them have a gap in their college time. And most of the folks, when I'm in econ, we start doing algebra on the board, they lose their color. So I have to work up to that with them a little bit to help them understand statistics and figure out exactly what they're doing.
In talking about data collection, I'm trying to figure out how to use the iPad, and not in creating surveys from the student standpoint, but collecting data that we have as a school as far as RTI and testing is concerned, and how to use an iPad to collect the data on what they've done and
Sure.
how to translate that to our students.
Sure.
I mean, not to our students, to our teachers,
Right.
so that we can
Better serve the students.
in the learning area.
Sure.
Are there apps that are able, or anything in the iPad that will be able to help us in doing that?
So you thinking about creating questions to ask teachers how they're using technology or how the topics they want to cover?
No, not necessarily. What I was really thinking about, instead of us creating a survey,
Right.
in data, when I saw data collection, I was thinking about how do I collect all this data? We've tested all these tests, and I've got everybody's score.
Right.
Now, what do we do with it? And how can I use an app or take our testing information
Right.
and then translate it into needs in the particular classroom?
So some type of app or something that would analyze or help you analyze a question.
Yes.
That's a great question. And that's why I like the iSurvey app, because once the data goes into the iPad, it makes it kind of pretty for us on the back end. And then, of course, we can export it in an Excel document and manipulate it in a number of different ways. I don't know of a particular app that would do that. Do you guys know of any app that you can bring data into?
I think some of the learning you might check to see if there's an LMS, learning management system, that the school has, because
Right.
those all have built-in
Sure.
data from just automatically averaging grades. And then and usually then you can, Excel is incredibly easy to, just to make simple charts, and then you can stick them in a PowerPoint. I find that that's about my level.
Excel is absolutely
But you can
taking data into the app.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Taking the data that we have and how we're you know, we're talking about RTI, you know, when we're taking, we have so many different systems that we've tested, and we've got bar charts and graphs and all this other stuff. And how do we turn it into something that's easily understood?
Right.
And can translate into, okay, now this is what I need to do in my classroom. This is what you need to do in your classroom.
Sure.
You know, they tell us that 14% of our children have passed the math test.
Right.
Okay, I know that means that 86% have failed. You know, how do I take that and turn that I was thinking about data collection on that one. Or easier ways to take information and spread it.
Sure.
Because this big huge graph that they're sending me makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
So trying to figure out what can be used to make it easier.
Have you tried any of the rubric apps just to use for your own self?
No, I didn't see those.
There's several rubric apps that you can put your own rubrics in, and as a teacher, as you walk around, you can automatically assess your students real quickly, and so that might give you some feedback that's more formative than some of it together for yourself. We've been playing with them a little bit, but I don't personally know, except for like using, you know, Excel or those on my iPad to really bring data in. We haven't been doing those other kinds.
That's really a good question, and to be honest with you, the data that we get from, when you download it from iSurvey, the spreadsheet is as big as the front of this building. And then we have to kind of boil it down in slides to make, you know, sense and kind of sound bites. So I understand what you're saying, and I'm just not familiar with anything that really is overly helpful.
Does the survey have things other than text?
Yes, you can do, you can put graphs in there, graphics and things of that nature, pictures and that type of thing. Absolutely.
It's maybe helpful on Google Forms and like Excel, you can create multiple sheets and then drag data from the first chart to other pages. But then you can give specific permissions to each of those pages to people. So you could share, say, a department, but they would only see their sheet and their data that's pulling from the master set of data. So things like that.
Thanks. Questions? What else do you have? Ideas about types of questions on surveys, questions about the data we presented, questions about how you might implement it with your students?
Does
Yes.
anybody in the room, because we're getting into video tagging for assessment, has anybody here used an app that they felt was good to do that?
Dartfish.
Well, I've used Dartfish, but as an app on your iPad, I didn't find that it worked extremely well.
That means like,
Yeah.
have the location included in.
Yeah, it would have a location, but then you could tag the video so you could do that better
Sure.
assessment. Yeah, Dartfish is a big guy. We have that.
That's really an interesting point. One of the features with iSurvey is it will geotag the responses, and I encourage my students to turn those off because the students don't have access to the raw data, but I do, and it can really go right down to I can see which household the survey was taken. It's a privacy thing. So, but the other piece of that, taking the video, one of the things my students and the IT folks wanted us to do was after you took the survey and you handed it back to me, and you wanted to talk about the election, was to record, your comments, and that would have been so rich and valuable to bring back to the classroom, right? I already said no. Sorry.
Could you, if you had done that, could you have tagged?
Well, I know iPhoto will tag the pictures. I don't know if it tags the video. I imagine it does. Geotags.
You can embed those
Right.
next to some charts.
Right, which would be very valuable with the IRB folks that have been very nervous because then all of a sudden I could tie the responses to your thoughts and perhaps that would not be a good thing. But if you guys have ever done that before, had students go out, because I've had them do some video journals and they do kind of cheat a tiny bit, let them do some man on the street type of things. And it's really fascinating when people give their consent and then they can show the videos in class. It really is powerful.
Well, I don't know if this would actually accomplish what you're trying, but have you all seen that video notes?
What is it?
Video notes.
Video
It's
notes?
like videonote.es.
Okay.
Basically, you can put a video into it on the left. On the right-hand side, you can type, and it automatically timestamps based off of where, as you're watching a video.
Sure.
And so you go back and forth, click on video, and see the note, or click on the note, go to the video. But I wondered if it's a plug-in for Google Drive.
Okay.
And obviously, you can search the text for docs, so I'm wondering if you can search the text for your video notes. So do quick notes right there, do a search for all the videos, it would come up with that tag, and then it could actually go right to that moment in the video if you need reference for it.
That'd be powerful.
So it's a Google app?
It's its own freestanding thing, but it's also a Drive plugin. And it can share like
I was actually looking up for her question regarding the analysis. Wolfram Alpha has a statistical analysis map. I don't know if that might go a little deeper than you're trying to go.
That's for her right there.
They do have that type of analysis.
And the name is?
It's through Wolfram Alpha.
Oh,
And it's like $2 for an Android.
sounds like, basically think about what the most important information is, because it sounds like you've got data overload, maybe more stuff than you want to deal with.
And they did. They introduced something called grid training. So it took from the test, it also took from their scores, and you got your reading test, and you got your accelerated reader, and your math test. So they took all those things and then spit it all out in one big thing, and the teacher just said, we want to do this. Right. So I'm trying to figure out different ways to make it easier.
And maybe
get the information.
Maybe they could just do it for you, ask them to disaggregate some of the data. So
They're overwhelmed, aren't
they?
they?
Do all the work.
The
And
analysis
then when we're
paralysis.
changing the testing, like we've taken the same test for the past 7 years, and then they changed the test. And they didn't like that test, so then they changed it again. So now we're all they're taking the SAT, not the SAT, the ACT, because they want them by the time they get into college or try to go to college, they've taken their version of the ACT from third grade all the way up to high school. And so that's what we're working on.
Daunting task.
Big.
Other questions, comments? For the good of the order. What would we like to know?
About different languages, maybe different languages and translation tools. Do you have any?
That's a great question. So if you have a survey and you want to deploy it in an area that has a different language, I don't know of any tool other than going to the language department, having them translate it for us. And then you really have to be careful with that as well, because we know that the slang in a certain language can mean different things. So you want to be really careful that you're asking the same thing in each language, because it then can create bias with the results and responses. Good stuff. What else? Well, I'm happy to hang around and chat with anybody individually if you like. I have my contact information on the slide. I've got my cards up here. I'll be glad to chat with you and answer questions now or 6 months from now. You can start playing with these types of things and see where it goes. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.